Today in Roach Reflections I want to talk about floats for river fishing in winter, very much winter, and how the floats that I've used on a couple of venues have progressed over many years, and there's a definite pattern to that progression. I seem to have gone from floats that don't take much shot up to floats that take a fair bit of shot to floats that take a lot of shot. And I wonder if this pattern helps me to catch the bigger roach rather than quantities of roach. We always talk about roach fishing, sensitivity, looking for the lightest float you can get away with. And yet I wonder if those heavier floats give a much steadier presentation. In fact, I think they do give a better presentation with much more weight down the line. If we take the River Frome, I've got a selection here of old floats that go back many years, many decades. The first one, this is not the actual float because I lost it long ago, but it's an exact copy, is a Drennan 4BB. I think they were called caster sticks, or it's just a plain balsa float, and it takes 4BB. And that is pretty much the float I used 50 years ago this month. That's incredible. To catch one of my first big roach, a roach of £1 10.5 from Wareham Quay. And back in those early 70s, the quay didn't seem to have massive strong currents. The currents we had some quite dry winters really, and the current would just gently go round, and I would fish in the slackest part of the current, catching the odd good roach and some dace. And that float did the job. So just a 4BB float. But as time went on, I acquired a lot more floats. I had very few floats 50 years ago. I made my own floats, and I started to buy Ivan Marks floats, and these are some Ivan Marks floats that I've used on Wareham Quay. Now, one of the favourite sorts of floats I started to use were the Ivan Marks sticks, which have got the old garden cane bases, quite heavy base, quite thick cane. This one has been painted a few times, so I can't read what it says. I think it's a 4BB stick, what would have been known as a 4BB stick, so fairly heavy by stick float standards. A bit more stable than the balsa float because of the weight of the cane in there. A nice float, sort of float I caught huge numbers of dace on, and had big catches of dace on the quay. So in reasonable conditions that was a good float. Another type of float I started to use, especially in this sort of size, were the Ivan Marks pacemakers. The original pacemakers, the true ones, were designed in about 1970 by Ivan Marks for, I believe, Howard Humphrey, who used them on the Blackwater in Southern Ireland, and they took about 5 treble A, but this is a 5BB one, and the favourite sizes that I had were the 4BB and 5BB, and I used them a lot for trotting on the Frome for dace, used them on the Piddle for dace, using the old lead shot in those days, a mixture of sort of BBs, number 1s and number 4s, and you can see they got quite a sensitive tip, a little bit of a shoulder. So by the mid-70s, this is the sort of float I might have used on Wareham Quay. There was one very dry winter, 75 into 76, when the flows on the Frome were below summer level. This is incredible, but this was leading up to the 1976 drought, and I used to use 4BB Ivan Marks 2mm antennas on there, believe it or not, but I wasn't fishing for roach. It was full of what you might call sprat dace, little tiny ones, and I'd caught dozens of those on antenna floats, which, looking at the average floats nowadays, you'd laugh at throwing a float like that out by Wareham Quay, but at the time it showed to me, it was before I really got into river waggler fishing, but it was an early step in that direction. The sensitivity of those 2mm tips was ideal for the little dace, but like I say, we weren't getting many roach at that time, and occasionally at the end of the season we get some big bags of dace with some decent roach. Big roach were very few and far between around about 1974-75 on the Frome. £1.50 was a very good one. I think I won the Roach Cup one year with 1.6, which was not very big really compared to what was to come. By 1976 proper, the autumn of 1976 into 77, I'd realised with when the drought did break, we got much stronger flows on the Frome, and I'd got quite a lot of these Ivan Marks balsas, and this one takes 4 treble A. These balsas tended to be a little bit overstated in the shotting, so 4 treble A was really, though it should be say 8 BB, it's more like about 7 BB. And that gave me more weight. It's fairly sensitive float again, fairly small tip. Remember getting some good catches on this float back in 76 and into 77, including a £40 catch of roach with a few dace in there, roach to over £2. And I was moving in the right direction. Over the next 6 or 7 years, maybe a bit more, 8 years, started to fish the Key a lot. The roach got bigger and bigger and bigger, and this float, I think this is, I've got 2 like this, don't think this is the actual one, this is the copy one. These 5 treble A balsas with very fine tips. It should have a much thicker tip like the other one, but it's got a very fine tip, and again they're slightly understated. It says 5 treble A, should be 10 BB, it's more like 9 BB. Used to shot these with 3 treble A, that's in lead, bunch with a BB, and then a BB and a number 4 bunch just above the hook length, and a number 4 in lead in those days on the hook length. So that gave me a lot of stability. That could boss the currents. I didn't fish in the slack, I'm fishing on the edge of the fast water, sensitive float, and use it for both bread and maggots. Very occasionally I'd fish further away from the bridge where it was very, very boily, and I had a couple of really big balsas. These are Ivan Marks balsas again, and this one says 6 treble A, and I had a 7 treble A one as well, which I've still got. I can remember fishing the 7 treble A in water where the 5 wouldn't cope with it, and catching the odd roach there with these really big floats. Well, what were to me big floats, and although that's a 6 treble A, it's actually, in this case it's understated, so it takes more like 7 treble A, and the 7 takes more like 8, so it's a 4 swan float. If we move on to the Stour at Wimborne, I've fished that a very long time. First fished it in 74 when we caught a few bleak, but started to fish it a bit more in the very early 80s, mainly in matches, fishing stick floats for dace. But gradually, by about 84, started to catch roach on there. I can't remember the exact floats I used at first. I think they would have been balsas, probably similar to this one. A 4 treble A balsa was ideal. I think I had some Shakespeare ones and ultra ones, and that was the sort of float I used at first. By a little bit later in the it's all tangled up now. A little bit later in the 80s, I started to get these Stan Bennett Avons, and this one's a 9 BB, quite sensitive tip, nice float. And that sort of float proved perfect for a very long time. And then I've been making my own floats for a very long time. Found that these floats were quite good. This is a bit of a more bulbous float, but I've actually started to go on to olivettes, and this says a 3 gram olivette, and it's got some small shot as well, which are probably equivalent to, so it's probably about 3.6 grams that float if we ignore the dropper shot. Then last winter, with the roach fishing coming back nicely, I started to use this float, which is very battered. If you watch my video from around about the 2nd of January 2020, this is the float I'm using, and I recently weighed up the actual olivet and shot, which I'll have to get untangled at some point. And the bulk is 4.2 grams. Back in the summer, I started to fish the Avon a bit, and there was a swim there. Although it was summer, it was quite deep. And I'd made some new floats with these pole float tips, 3mm pole float tips, but with a strong bit of croakwill at the base. And this one's well battered now. And this takes quite a bit more weight. It's 5.7 grams. And I've been using this float all winter on the Stour. And it really does boss the swim. It ignores winds. I won't say it will beat a howling down streamer, but light breezes, it just takes charge really. So I think the lesson is, don't be afraid to use weight. You need the sensitivity in the tip. If you're going to use a heavy float for roach, use as thin a tip as you can see and can get away with. If the tip's too thin on somewhere like the Avon and it's boiling, it's just going to get sucked under. It's not going to work. But think about your floats. Like I say, I can make my own floats. I've got a video about making Avon floats. They are easy to make. You can make them with something like an electric drill and the balsa dowel. You don't have to have a quill stem at the base. You can use just a bit of kebab skewer. But I do like these pole float tips. So I started, the first ones I could get were only up to 3mm. I got 2s, 2.5s and 3s. And since then I've ordered them direct from, I think it's Bulgaria, and got them up to 5, and got some really big floats I've yet to try out yet, but I think they will work. Hope I've got you thinking again. There's not many days left to the end of the river fishing season, just a week or so. Please click like and subscribe. Gradually getting there with subscribers, getting more views. And I wish you luck in the last few days of the season after the roach. Treat them carefully and they'll repay you in growing bigger. And it's goodbye for now.